Okay.
Welcome to this would be the February 9th edition of Golden Black Live. Brian Newbert will join me for segment one. We will have Chad Brown will join us for, I think it's seg two, Troy Lewis, seg three, maybe even a special appearance by Gene Cady at the end of the show, which we're looking forward to as well. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. And we appreciate them very much for their sponsorship as well. All right, Brian, we're going to open this segment. Like I said, it is always special when Purdue and Indiana play. And yet the Boilermakers, won by 21, I believe it was, in Assembly Hall. Indiana got my attention a little bit by beating Ohio State and coming back when they were left for dead. But do you see any scenarios where this game is a 35 to 40-minute game on Saturday night? I mean, what does Indiana have to do to stay in the game?
Yeah, I think that obviously things in rivalries can flip pretty quick and
Yeah, I
funny
agree.
things happen. On paper, it wouldn't look like that's really all that strong a possibility. I think the Indiana comeback against Ohio State was a double-edged sword because they also got down by 18,
Yeah,
what has been a very mediocre team this Big Ten season. And I think you probably want to point a finger at Ohio State as much as you want
yeah,
to credit Indiana for that. I'm not taking away from what they did. That was a great win for them
yeah,
under the circumstances and some measure of proof that they have impacted in for the season. Um, but I think what you saw in Bloomington was one team that's just significantly better than the other one team that played significantly harder than the other one. And with this game being in Mackey Arena now, I wouldn't anticipate any of those things reversing themselves. I do think this is a Purdue team that takes some of these games personally. And I think there's a higher level of focus. There's a higher level of effort that comes out in games like this. And I think you'll see that um, on Saturday night. I think that if Indiana's going to have a chance, they're going to have an outlier shooting game. That's happened before. I don't know if it's ever happened in Mackey Arena. Jalen Hood-Schifino, they just couldn't cover him last year. He is long gone, much to Purdue's delight. Khalil Ware is banged up, but if he can make a bunch of threes, that's problematic for Purdue. Malik Reneau is always a difficult matchup on the block. Those are kind of the two guys that would concern me if I was Purdue. Trey Galloway getting hot like he did in Bloomington. I think that's kind of one of those situations where Assembly Hall takes guys to a higher level sometimes. Other than that, I just don't think Indiana's got the guard play to really be all that problematic for Purdue. In the past, when Indiana has been the inferior team, they've had a Jalen Hood-Schifino who could really attack a weak spot in Purdue's defense. They've had a Xavier Johnson at times who could really make floaters over drop coverage and ball screen offense, things like that. I just don't think Indiana's got the guard play you have to really put 40 good offensive minutes up against Purdue. And that at the end of the day, you still have to outscore Purdue because they're really good offensively. And I don't know if they're good enough defensively to hold Purdue to a reasonable number. So I would be surprised, but we've all been surprised before by outcomes in the Big Ten. We've all been surprised before by outcomes in Purdue, Indiana. So you never want to speak too soon, but on paper, this looks like a comfortable win for Purdue.
Jalen Hood-Schifino had 35 last year. Trey Galloway had 25 at Ohio State. It did shoot well, like you said. I think it was 17 in that first game, but it is going to take all Indiana can do, one would think, to get the job done. What do you make? Purdue has obviously, to some extent, run the gauntlet. It's not over, but it's sure looking good for Purdue to pull its 26th Big Ten championship. Go to Wisconsin and tough out a game. They still just seem to have the edge of getting the job done. As Matt Painter said in his availability on Thursday, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't, but they still seem to have that extra gear to get the job done. And really, in the Wisconsin game, they were in control down the stretch. Most of these games, they've had a measure of, wasn't over by any stretch, but they were still up 6 to 8 points down the stretch. Is that just the face of the best team in the Big Ten? Is that a sure sign of a team with another year of maturity? How do you put that together?
Yeah, I think it's been good for Purdue. To have to strain the last three games.
Yeah,
You know, they had to stave off Rutgers.
yeah,
They had to come back on Northwestern, and then on the road again, they had to stave off Wisconsin, who was arguably the best of those three teams. And Purdue did everything they needed to do to win. And I think Purdue is probably does have an extra gear sometimes that maybe isn't always being applied. And I guess opponents deserve credit for that. I'm not saying Purdue is coasting by any
no,
means, but
that's good.
I think when their best comes out when they're pushed, that's a pretty good sign. And I think that's kind of happened here the last couple games for Purdue. As I said before, I do think it's a good thing for them to not just be blowing through people. I do think the margin they have over the rest of the Big Ten in terms of how good they are is pretty significant. And but they are having their mettle tested. They are having their winning instincts, sharpened, so to speak. And I think it's a very good sign for them moving forward that they have been able to thrive in these really highly competitive situations. And I wouldn't expect otherwise from them. But I do think you're seeing some things in this team right now that represent progress from last season.
Yeah,
And it could have been predicted. Experience, maturity, all that stuff is cultivated over time. And when the guys with the ball in their hands, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer now have that, I think that this was kind of the natural evolution of things. And I think this is what we talked about. I've talked about all season long that, in terms of championships and, March success and things like that, last year wasn't Purdue's shot. This year is Purdue's shot because their guards are all grown up now. They've got better depth than I think they did last season. Obviously, Lance Jones has been transformative. Zach Edey's improved. But the biggest piece of that puzzle has been Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer being older, more experienced, and just more mature as Big Ten basketball players. And I think that you've seen that come out here the last couple of games.
yeah, no question that they have been outstanding, and for the most part, again, that it's been a 9-man rotation. Last against Wisconsin, you only have a couple. I think Gillis is the only one that scores any points off the bench. But this is a bench too that Cameron Heidi's made contributions. Certainly, Ethan Morton doesn't do a lot of the stat sheet, but he gets a lot of things done. Anything, is there anything that you see changing in that rotation as you go further? Caleb Furst probably is number 9 right now, the kind of the way things have gone from minutes played. Do you see any other tweaks to that, or do you think it's going to be a nine person roster all the way through? What do you see Matt Painter doing?
I think what you see right now is what you get the rest of the season. I mean, anything can happen. I think there might be situations competitively where he's got a little more flexibility because games are not as competitive as some of the ones that have been played before. And maybe that affords more minutes for Caleb Furst. Maybe that affords some minutes for Miles Colvin, things like that. Maybe that means more Lance Jones playing the point and less Braden Smith on the floor. I don't think Matt Painter views uh, things right now as in we have to curb people's minutes. I think he kind of views that as something that occurs during the week. I also think he has faith in Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer that they're in good enough shape now and conditioned well enough, both physically and mentally, to not hit the quote unquote wall they hit last season around this time. Um, so I think that right now this is what you're going to get. I think Mason Gillis is a critical player for this team, a sixth starter, one of the obvious candidates for Big Ten Sixth Man of the Year. There's a couple good ones, but he has been instrumental to this team's success. I think Ethan Morton's played well off the bench. I think Caleb Furst and Trey Kaufman-Renn, when in there together, have played pretty well together. I think it's important to a certain extent that Purdue be able to find some offense when Zach Edey's not on the floor, and I think Purdue's figured that out a little bit. So I think that, yeah, I just think the rotation you've seen here lately is kind of what's going to endure. And on top of the fact that you're winning, it's this deep into the season, and changing now wouldn't really make a whole lot of sense unless there was some urgent call or impetus in order to change. And obviously you want to keep rolling when you're rolling. So I don't think you're going to see anything overt in terms of Purdue changing. Now they're going to shorten their practices like they always do. They're going to, probably not have their best guys doing as much in between games. I would have to think, but I don't think they're gonna tweak anything in terms of what you see on game days.
You've talked about the transformative nature of Lance Jones, and you've talked about how thought he was going to be a key player, but now he's really he is an all Big Ten level player. I'm not saying he's going to make a first team all Big Ten, but he has been that good, that confident, and made huge plays against Wisconsin to kind of help get Purdue over the hump. You spent a lot of time talking to Matt Painter about that as well, but just his role and what he looks to mean as Purdue gets to tournament time, because it seems to me he's got to give a coaching staff a lot of confidence that they've got an X factor that can really help them.
Well, at the very basic level, he has completed Purdue. I mean, he really has.
Yeah.
He's given them another on-ball defender, another ball handler. And it's so valuable in college basketball nowadays to have multiple ball handlers on the floor. He essentially allows Purdue to play 2 point guards, 3 if you consider Fletcher Loyer as a guy who can be a primary ball handler. He just probably won't be ever in his career. He has given Purdue those 2 elements. He's given them a transition element that has really, really added another layer from an offensive productivity perspective, another layer as if they need any pressure on opposing defenses. One more thing to be aware of, as if Zach Edey wasn't enough of a problem, as if Braden Smith and ball screen offense isn't enough of a problem, as if all these 40% three-point shooters aren't enough of a problem. Now you have to be wary of Lance Jones just going end to end on you. What they've gotten from him as a scorer is just something that I don't think anyone could have seen coming. I think they were, I don't know if I was going to say this out loud at this point, but I think they really recruited him as an element guy and not necessarily a game changer. And what they've gotten has been a game changer. They needed a backup point guard. They needed a ball handler. They just needed an athlete, basically, in the backcourt. And they got that, but they also got a guy who's, the way I like to put it was Purdue returned a big 3 from last year's team in Zach Edey, Braden Smith, and Fletcher Loyer, and Lance Jones has made it a big 4. And again, I keep saying this: if you could combine Trey Kaufman-Renn and Mason Gillis into one player, you'd basically have 5 all Big Ten starters. I think that's the level of productivity they're getting at every position. But you just can't say enough about what Lance Jones has done tangibly as a basketball player, but intangibly too. I mean, I just think his energy is just something that has really been a valuable commodity on this team. The joy he plays with has been a really, really valuable commodity on this team. I don't think this was ever really a thing, but this season could have been, a 6-month tension headache for Purdue, given all the expectations, given the undercurrent of how their season's ultimately going to be judged, and just having a guy out there who's just having the time of his life. I just think there's no other way to look at that other than that being just awesome for this team.
All right, the other guy that's having the time of his life, though quietly, stoically, just does it every game, is Zach Edey, and some of the narrative around him has been a little bit nutty on a national level, or at least in the social media sphere. But hard to put into perspective again just how good he's been. Yes, he gets fouled a lot. I don't know why people are surprised by that. It's because that's what he does, and that's what Purdue does. But talk just about him. Is there a way to really say this is where he is, or is he's just going to be the greatest player that's ever played at Purdue the way he's going by the time he's done.
Well, it's going to be hard to make a case against him if you just look at numbers,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Now, ultimately, he's going to be judged in the totality of his career from a winning perspective. So the most important part of his career is yet to come. Whether that's fair or not, I don't know. I mean, we don't talk about Glenn Robinson as having never gone to a Final Four, right? We don't.
right.
I guess Rick Mount didn't he?
He went to the national championship game? Yes, he did. But
Okay.
yes,
Um, but no, I mean, it's going to be hard to argue against him.
um,
What Zach Edey has done, and this might not necessarily answer your question, but he has exposed the stupidity of so many college basketball people
I
and
love
just
that.
how people, what he has done to the collective stupidity of the court of public opinion is just astounding. How he has gotten between the ears of just so many people on social media and people actually platforming it and giving it credibility, which is, I guess, what I'm doing right now by mentioning it. But the whole everything becomes a referendum on the officiating. He's become kind of this avatar for people's loathing of officials. People saying he's not good, he's just big.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do they
Um,
watch the game? Yeah. Yeah.
they don't watch the games. They read tweets, they
Yeah.
scan tweets, and then they just don't understand basketball whatsoever. And it started in November. Purdue played a couple SEC teams. I don't think I'm going out on a limb here by suggesting SEC people aren't exactly the most knowledgeable basketball people. Um, might go so far as to say they're not the most knowledgeable people, period. But
But you digress.
that was that was their whole story was, Tennessee only lost to Purdue be, be, because the fix was in from the refs because of Zach Edey. And I always said that, hey, next time you have a first round NFL defensive tackle who gets held on every play but gets 5 flags all year, don't come crying to me because that's exactly what Zach Edey is. Um, but people saying he's not a good defensive player, it's just insane. He's one of the most impactful defensive players in college basketball. He's going to be, I'd have to think he's right there for Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year right now. The three other guys who'll probably be on my Defensive Player of the Year ballot, I can't remember if I even vote, would be Ace Bailey, Cliff Amore, and Coleman Hawkins, along with Edey. And I would take Edey over any of those guys from a defensive perspective. But no, he has just why he has become this divisive figure in college basketball is just kind of dumbfounding. He's a farm for bad takes,
Yeah. Yeah.
as which is a good problem to have sometimes because it's what happens to you nowadays when you're really good and people are tired of watching you be really good. It's like I completely digress here, but I always make the argument that Michael Jordan's legacy would be very, very different had there been a Twitter, back then. You see Tom Brady win all these rings and Derek Jeter, and there's a segment of the population that just can't stand those guys because they're sick of watching them win.
Yeah.
They're sick of watching them be the best players. LeBron James, another great example. Um, and that's what Zach Edey's become to college basketball. He's just become this kind of binary. You're either for him or against him. You either like the Beatles or you like the Rolling Stones. And it's insane the level of just dumb stuff that is out there about Zach Edey. And I guess he's earned it, but he's a great player. He's one of the great players in all of college basketball history. He is not a concoction of the referees. He is not only good because he's tall. I would argue that being tall is not even his biggest strength as a player. His biggest strength as a player, on top of being good at basketball for someone his size, is size. And size and height are two different things. His defining characteristic is his strength, his width, his ability to hold position, his physicality. I think I mentioned his strength already,
Yeah.
but also how nimble he is for a player that size. Height is part of it, but only part of that. And that's what has made Zach Edey great, but he's also good. He's a good basketball player. He's become a really good passer, a really good defensive player in ways that guys that big should not be good. He's the best rebounder in college basketball, if you ask me. He's an, way more active a rebounder than anybody that size should be. I'll go back to Isaac Haas. Was he a great rebounder?
No.
He was not. It's not just about being big and the ball coming to you. It's about anticipating, moving, responding to things, having quick reaction time, things like that. Um, he's just a great player, and how anybody could watch him and come up with some other take contrary to that is just absolutely mind-boggling. But also a close look into just how stupid our sports opinion culture has become. We've been first take to death, we've been barstooled to death, and everything is, everyone's overrated, everyone sucks, nothing matters. It's just he's kind of become one of the faces of that in college basketball. So
You're done. You're right. It drives me crazy. We could have four people standing on the street corner or in front of their computers with their
no,
own.
and look, I get kind of heated about that, and it's not me sticking up for Purdue. I mean,
No, nothing to do with that.
it's just objective fact. Like Purdue people made a lot of the same arguments about Trace Jackson Davis that people make about Zach Edey in terms of, oh, well, he's not going to do anything in the NBA. Like, so doesn't mean he's not a great college player. And Trace Jackson Davis is in the NBA, as Zach Edey will be next year. But like, we just kind of come up with these intellectually dishonest arguments to cut people down.
Yeah.
That's just sort of the sports culture we're in, and I'm trying to fight, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And doing a good job with it. And it's an uphill battle. In today's world, it's almost impossible. But
to the few thousand people who I speak to, yes.
There you go. All right, Brian. Thank you for your views and your not so hot takes, just your reasoned takes of what we're going to see not only Saturday night, but also the rest of the season with Purdue basketball. So, all right, stay tuned, because next segment will be Chad Q. Brown, who will talk about his business profile behavior, and a lot about what's going on in the world of Purdue sports. And then, of course, Troy Lewis will join us, and maybe even a cameo appearance by Gene Katie at the end of the show as well. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes and for more of the show. Take care.